Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Larimer, and today I'm joined by Mlondi and Bluli. Mlondi, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. Good and you, and it's a pleasure to be back.
Very good to have you back with us. And we are also joined today by our Supreme Leader, Dr. John Endres. John, how are you doing?
All good, and I can only echo Mlondi's sentiments. Also really good to be back on the show. And I've had to give you short shrift a few times now.
It's always good to have you back as well. To give. I mean, and I'm not just saying that because I work for you, but also because you have many interesting things to say. But let us dive into the news stories of today. Oh yes, before I get to that, just a reminder to everyone that this is registration weekend, where you can register to vote this weekend. It is likely to be the last opportunity to register to vote, because once the election date is declared, which will probably happen next week, you can't add new names to the voters roll. So I would strongly suggest that if you love democracy, prosperity, freedom, and life, that you go out and register to vote so that you can make your voice heard when the election rolls around, probably in May this year, maybe later. But anyway...
if I may add something in there, Nick, sorry, you can check that online, right? elections.org.za. Just check that you're still registered where you think you're registered, because in case records got changed and you suddenly find yourself having been moved without knowing, this is the time to find out. So just visit the IEC website and check it.
You can also go down to the with your ID book to the local voting station, and they will check it for you there, if you want. Yep. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about the DA being accused of racism for the billionth time, the ANC claiming that it has delivered on 90% of its election promises, and the prospects of the multi-party charter taking some of the provinces. So let's start off with the first one, and this is a story that I actually haven't paid a lot of attention to until now, but what happened was DA leader John Steenhuisen, who is out there campaigning at the moment, told supporters on Saturday, so almost a week ago, that he didn't have a very high opinion of Panyaza Lesufi's crime warden program. During his speech, he said, quote, "What did Panyaza Lesufi do? He took your tax money to buy ill-fitting PEP stores uniforms for untrained cadres and pretend that they were crime wardens. What kind of person pulls a drunkard out of a shebeen and gives him a uniform and a weapon and unleashes them onto the community?" This was posted on Twitter, and predictably people were angry on Twitter, but the anger has received some sort of media attention. The story that I'm actually reading this from describes the backlash as huge against Steenhuisen, accusing him of racism, as claiming that, I think the claim here is that Steenhuisen was implying that black people can only shop at PEP because they're too poor or something like that. Steenhuisen on Wednesday said that he really wasn't interested in apologizing because he thinks that we're missing the point here. He says, "I don't think there's any reason to apologize. I shop at PEP. 90% of my daughter's clothing comes from PEP. I'm very proud to shop there. It's value for money. There's nothing racist about that. There was nothing racist about it when people said, 'Calm your house. Where's PEP store camouflage?' It is into the South African lexicon." He went on to say that he believes that Panyaza Lesufi's crime warden program is essentially a private militia which is wreaking havoc in Gauteng. He claims that 22 vehicles have been crashed by the crime wardens, innocent people have been pulled out of their homes and beaten up, and real police officers have been physically attacked. He said, quote, "This is a militia being run by Panyaza Lesufi, and believe you me, it's not going to be a long time before they turn on politicians. Once they've finished with us, they're going to come for everybody else. We should be very worried about this private military." This sort of coincides with some thoughts I had on the crime wardens back when, I think last year, Panyaza Lesufi was very upset with Beki Cele that the crime wardens had not been given access to firearms, which is something he had requested. So, Mlondi, I think I'm going to start with you here. Firstly, I mean, do you think what Steenhuisen said was racist? And secondly, and more interestingly, do you think that the crime wardens program has been effective in Gauteng from what you've read about them?
Okay, so I'll begin with the first question. So, is John racist? No, it's not. And you know, like we see this all the time when it's a time for for an election rather. Like when the DA is always they always try to find that one thing that they're trying to pin on the party for being racist, and now we've reached that time again. So I'd say if maybe let's say for example, Julius Abalema, he said this. I don't think that there would have been much of a problem on on X. Like we all like would have laughed, but because it's John now, they're trying to find that one thing to say no, he's racist, but it's not racist. It's actually it's actually the truth. I mean, like, what has the the Amapanyas done? Like they haven't done anything to like help tackle crime. So that's just to answer your second question. I think that like our crime is still pretty much high, especially in Gauteng. And like if you look at for example Gauteng and compare that to Cape Town, where there's a proper additional police force called a leap, like you actually see that that there's a difference in like the crime rates. Whereas in Cape Town, like they have a crime issue, but you see it's slowly getting down. But in Gauteng, it's still high. And what have these guys achieved? Absolutely nothing. So yeah, I'd say it's a complete failure.
No, I think that's a really good point you bring up comparing Leap to the crime wardens in Gauteng because they're kind of the same idea, right? It's additional help for the cops. But the sort of implementation here has been very different. The Leap guys seem, at least from what I've read about them, much better trained and organized than the crime wardens. John, what do you make of this? This fuss here? I mean, is Steenhuisen correct to be worried that this is a private militia forming by Panyaza Lesufi?
I think in the first place, he's absolutely right to be dismissive of Panyaza initiative, and he's also right to use pointed language. So it's very very fine to use technocratic language and talk about the law and the finances and the public finances and the effectiveness of a force like this, but sometimes to break through in the media space, you've got to make a remark that is that gets people to sit up and pay attention. And I think that's what John Steenhuisen was doing. He was using exaggeration for effect and to generate impact. And that's a legitimate tool, I think, of political communication. So I agree with Mlondi. It's not a racist comment, but we are in the election silly season, as our other stories will also be showing. Now's the time. If you're a politician, to say things which are slightly edgy, a little bit crazy, and try to score points off your opponents. And the racism one, you can see it coming a mile away. If there's an election coming, there's going to be racism claims against the DA. That always happens, and I'm sure there'll be other ones. But ultimately, as so often, that is a diversion and a distraction. And the key point really is, what is John Steenhuisen drawing attention to? And I think he's rightly drawing attention to a boondoggle of the ANC, a pet project of the Premier, designed to put some more people on the state payroll, maybe project force, maybe try to swing some votes in the election. But ultimately, it is really not what is on the tin. It's not a police force. I think it's a personal project, and he's right to call it out.
I very much agree. So, in principle, I'm very on board with the idea of decentralized police, of having each province having its own sort of arm of cops to deal with the problems that they deal with in the way that suits that province. But the key here really is implementation. I could go and give a bunch of guys some Bucky's shotguns and then just tell them to go around and clean up the streets, and the result would probably be a human rights abusing nightmare. So I think it's very important to criticize these, not so much the idea of having a decentralized police force here, but having one that doesn't seem to be working very well, particularly if Steenhuisen is correct in some of the stats he was talking about there in the incidents regarding the crime wardens. Okay, let's move on to our next one, I think, and this is, the ANC's election pitch this year. It's been an interesting campaign in some ways in that I think it hasn't been too complicated. None of the parties have done, I think, something too complicated in their messaging. The DA's campaign slogan is, I think, for registration was register to rescue SA. A lot of the parties are using quite dramatic lingo. The ANC has so far talked a lot about grants. They've talked a lot about jobs, that kind of stuff. And as part of that, Fikile Mbalula recently spoke to the media where he said that the ANC was not particularly worried that it was going to have a bad election, that it had fulfilled 90% of its election promises set out in 2019, and that the party, he believed, was in good shape to get over 50% of the vote again. John, let me start with you. It's kind of funny because I remember actually recently that Ramaphosa was admitting that the ANC had failed a lot of its own election promises. But that rhetoric seems to have changed rather sharply all of a sudden.
Well, again, we're going into the elections. Now's the time to project confidence, to project performance and capabilities. And that's what Fikile Mbalula is doing here. But I think the credibility is lacking, we might say. So I think most South Africans are not really in a space where they feel that there's been tremendous progress over the last 5 years, or that the governing party has achieved its targets. It also mirrors, in a sense, what we saw Cyril Ramaphosa saying in an interview on Newsroom Africa a few days ago, where he was put on the spot and was asked, but what have you actually achieved over the past 5 years? And he defaulted to things like, fixing SARS, getting the NPA to work again, stopping state capture, but it's all not really credible. So I think the ANC is still going to battle a little bit to be persuasive in terms of its performance and its delivery. But on the other hand, I'm also not detecting that much voter enthusiasm at the moment. And maybe that is something we can still talk about as we come to the last story. Looking at the first registration week and now the second one coming on, are we seeing people sort of really up in arms, going to those voter registration stations, thousands deciding to make a change? I'm not really seeing that. So the ANC might actually be able to get away with this. Just claim everything's fine. We've been doing well. We'll continue to do well. Give us your vote, and they'll be back where they are. Nick.
So this is an interesting question, Mlondi. In the local government election, we saw our lowest ever turnout for a South African election since '94, and it's fair to say that I think there was a fair amount of apathy. Now, low turnout can benefit the opposition. Because generally speaking, historically speaking, South African opposition voters have tended to be more motivated to go out and vote than ANC voters. But there's an argument that one can make that, in a sense, the ANC's biggest help here will be the sort of general apathy of the population. It's a very common sentiment out there in our body politic that all politicians are the same, all politicians are corrupt, there's no one worth voting for, that kind of thing. Do you think voter apathy that John says that you might have detected a bit of is going to hurt or help the ANC? How do you think they're gonna go? Do you agree with my hypothesis there?
Yeah. Well, Nick, this that I'm getting out in the streets is that people are really fed up of the ANC. They are really fed up. Think about these are the same people that have promised that they're going to end load shedding for the past decade and more, in fact. And these are the guys that keep on saying, "Look, we're going to get the economy, up and running." But look, what the IMF said on 2 days ago, they said that the country's economy will grow by 1%, which is like 0.9%. A 0.8% decrease compared to the figure that they estimated in October 2023. So the ANC is continuing to fail, and no person who has a working brain will would support failure. We want growth, and people are just so fed up of the ANC, and I guess that's the sense, because before, in my younger years, before I could even vote, whenever there's time to go and I register, I'd see people in ANC shirts, going out campaigning for the ANC. Even also the problem of the posters as well. It's quite surprising that the ANC didn't only put posters up until recently. But anyway, I just think that it's not the same. But hopefully, I hope that this will benefit the opposition.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that, there really haven't been that many ANC posters. I mean, the ANC usually doesn't put up that many posters for registration weekends, but I agree with you. I've also been completely sort of shocked by the sort of lack of ANC presence on the streets, which they're normally pretty good at. You normally see at least a couple. I think I've only seen one so far, and ANC registration posters, in my opinion, are usually never that good because it's always like lots of writing and 1,400 people, representing every demographic you can imagine, kind of in a picture together, all smiling, and it doesn't really catch the eye. It just looks sort of like a bit of a blur, especially when you're driving. I don't know, John. What do you make of the ANC's campaign so far? What's kind of interesting to me is that as far as I can tell, there hasn't been much new. A lot, they've kind of done the greatest hits of ANC campaigns. The opposition is racist and foolish. We given everyone grants and built people houses and that kind of stuff. Where do you think their campaign's at on both a technical and a sort of messaging level?
Yeah, I think so far I would agree that it's been relatively low energy. I wonder if that's going to change now. So I think Fikile Mbalula, for all his faults, has been quite good at firing up the ANC campaign engine in the past, as Mr. Razmat has. So he's probably trying to do that now. I think they were constrained by not only lack of funding, but debt. And maybe they've solved that problem now. As one of the viewers is saying in the chat, Grasshopper, they had no money to do that up until recently. It seems that they have managed to fix their financial problems. And it may well be that we'll now see, more visible presence, more events, more maybe what was it? Shoe drives, shoe collection drives, shoe donation drives, food parcel drives, ANC T-shirt drives, in the hopes that will make a difference. But I think your overall observation is right, Nicholas, that there's not terribly much enthusiasm out there amongst the voters. And for the political parties to inject that now is going to be quite tough, even for the ANC and even with a big budget.
And it's definitely something to watch. I think, turnout is going to be really important. There are a lot of ANC supporters who and this has, been traditionally the pattern, who don't necessarily want to vote for the opposition. The opposition has been demonized in their eyes, but they're not particularly enthusiastic to vote for the ANC. And if a lot of those people stay home, it's going to boost the opposition quite a lot if they can get their people out. So I think, it's a cliche in election analysis to say it's all down to turnout, but I think this election in a very big way will be all down to turnout at the end of the day. That comment you made about shoe drives, that's because in the pre-show chat we were talking about, and this is a story I don't think we're going to cover today, but the murder of a Joburg water official and the injuring of an ANC chief, or the ANC chief whip in the city of Johannesburg. Very disturbing political violence event, but a sort of less examined part of that story is what they happened to be doing when this assassination attack occurred. And it seems as though Joburg Water was handing out school shoes in an ANC ward, which, you could say, okay, there's reasons for that. I mean, poor kids need school shoes, but that also sounds awfully close to using state resources to campaign. And I have no idea what the speeches were inside that hall, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they were, shall we say, directed in a certain political party's direction. But that's speculation on my part. I wasn't there. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. And this is a discussion about the opposition prospects. And it does look now like the multi-party charter. This is the alliance of the DA, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP, and a number of other parties, who have much sort of lessened their rhetoric. There's a little bit of talk of them trying for national government, for a coalition, but I think the polling is suggesting that that's not going to happen. So they seem to very much be beating the drum of taking control of two of South Africa's most important provinces, that being KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, in next year's election. The Freedom Front Plus CEO said that Jacob Zuma's political defection from the ANC would help the charter, particularly in KZN, and that he believes that the multi-party charter would have a very good chance of grabbing KZN and Gauteng from the ANC. So let's talk a little bit about this. Firstly, John, I'm not sure if I entirely agree with the idea that Jacob Zuma's party's formation will prevent the ANC from getting into government, particularly in KZN. Not because it won't take votes from the ANC, but rather because it's almost certain to go into a coalition with the ANC.
Yeah, so I think the comments that we're speaking about now really are once again a projection of confidence. So as the MPC, you're trying to get your voters to believe that your party or your parties can take over government. That's what you have to do. But that's political communication. On the other hand, of course, you've got the reality of the matter. I think in Gauteng, polling is showing the DA and the ANC at pretty similar levels. That's interesting. The question then becomes, if they do come out in the mid-30s, for example, who will they be able to go into coalition with? So maybe in Gauteng there's an option, and I think that Action SA's role is probably going to be quite important in Gauteng especially. So that's probably going to be the game changer, possibly in Gauteng. In KwaZulu-Natal, the game changer could be MK. It's a bit hard to tell because it's such a new party still at this stage. But if it does manage to attract quite a few votes, I agree with you that it's hard to say that is going to be to the benefit of the MPC necessarily, because the one option is the one you describe, which is that MK goes back in with the ANC after the election and they form a majority, and I don't think that's that unlikely. It would be quite a neat solution for the ANC in a way, because they know they've got a KZN problem. They know they're sort of battling to maintain the confidence of the voters after years of bad performance. But making those disgruntled voters go to MK, leave their votes there, and then bringing them back into the fold would actually be quite a smart thing to do. And I don't think this is by design. I don't think it's a conspiracy or anything like that. But it is a way of getting things to play out in a way that is to your advantage, if that is the way it should happen to play out. The other question is going to be the IFP as well. So, does MK take votes from the IFP, thereby weakening the most important MPC partner in that province? I think that's another possibility. I think there's some polling going on in KZN at the moment, specifically targeting the MK question. So in a couple of weeks or so, we'll probably have some results on what the support levels are, what the awareness levels are of MK, and then we'll be in a better position to comment on what impact it may have on those elections. Nick?
Yeah, I'm very fascinated to see what those polling results will say, because, as you say, the MK party is very bit mysterious now. As you say, I think the IFP, and we've talked about this on the show before, I think in the first episode we did on the MK, is that the IFP does have something to worry about from the MK party. Firstly, it's got Zuma, who does have still residual popularity in KZN. It's the only province where people sort of like him. Also, if you look at the MK party's messaging, it's very sort of kind of old school law and order traditionalists. There's an appeal to sort of religion and like strong law and order stuff. I mean, Jacob Zuma said during his campaigning that criminals have too many rights. Whether that's true or not, and as I said before, he would know, this is, something I think that fishes in the IFP's pond in particular. So Mlondi, I think you're currently in KZN, and you are, you come from, it's your home turf. What's your sense of how the election is shaking up there? Have you heard much talk about the MK party?
Yes, Nick. Well, unfortunately, I'm in KZN and I was born and bred here. But yeah, so definitely I think the MK is kind of entering the political turf here, but I don't think it'll get a lot of votes. I estimate maybe around about 5%, which is kind of huge for a new party, but maybe below. It could be below. But I think that the MK definitely has a role to play, but it's pretty much concerning because people that would have gone and voted for IFP that were fed up with the ANC are now saying, oh, wait, look, we don't have to vote for IFP if the MK is here. So I think there might be some deflection from the IFP, while those that would have voted for IFP are now going to the MK. So yeah, it's a bit concerning, but I really do hope that that the multi-party charter can still pull through, which I think is still possible, because people aren't fools. we see what's happening here. For example, there was a protest in Phoenix just I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, where people were protesting about, I think it was water and electricity. So I mean that the problems are there, and also our beaches also aren't still safe. So there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues that people aren't happy about, which I think that they would want to express their dissatisfaction by voting for another party.
Yeah, I think the water shortage stuff, which has been going on in Durban, is really not going to be working in the ANC's favor. What's interesting about KZN though is that it's such a fractured province in terms of new parties. I can't remember the exact number, but when you look at the Durban City Council, the number of political parties that have at least one seat is huge. I think it's the biggest in the country. Is something like 16 or 17 parties. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those parties managed to nab at least one seat in the KZN legislature. I'm thinking of parties like the Abantu Bato Congress, the African Transformation Movement, ATM, sort of African Independent Congress, parties like that, all managing to get a little bit of a thing there, and then becoming the swing votes in that province, which will create a provincial administration that's probably just as chaotic as the city administrations of many of our municipalities have been. I don't know, John. What do you make of that? What are your final thoughts on this topic?
Well, one issue that we've been asking ourselves, I think, within the IRR, is whether MK will be able to set up structures sufficient to attract votes and be functional. And I think we're not really seeing that very much at the moment. They seem to be explicitly distancing themselves from formality and from announcing candidates, and creating the kinds of things you need to conduct an election. So one possibility would be that they take over branches wholesale. Maybe there are some ANC branches that'll just wander over across to MK and say, now we're an MK branch now, possibly. But on the whole, it does not bode well, I think, for governance in KZN, if MK is involved, if their governance is of the same flavor as their campaigning and their setting up of party structures, it's going to be pretty chaotic. So that's not a great prospect. So I also wonder if it's going to be a one-seat party. It's going to be like a flash in the pan, a tiny little thing that disappears soon, or is it going to attract quite a few votes and maybe have an impact? Tough to tell at the moment, but we'll keep an eye on it. Nick?
I agree. It's definitely very much an unknown. Like I said, I'm very fascinated to see what the polling ends up saying about this. All right. Very briefly, let's just touch on one more story about KZN, and this is that there was a motion of no confidence in the eThekwini Municipal Council, in which the big parties in opposition, or in sort of opposition, the DA, the IFP, called a vote of no confidence in the mayor. I believe they were supported by the EFF. I'm not 100% sure from the reporting. But ultimately, the vote failed due to the defection of many of those very small parties I was just talking about. And it does kind of raise the question to ask, I mean, the IFP and DA were very upset about this, saying the IFP accused the small parties of being bribed by the ANC because apparently they'd had a 5-minute caucus break just before the vote and then suddenly switched their votes. The DA was very aggressive, saying that they had sold out their communities and that they had inflicted the ANC upon them. The ANC and its allies in council described this as nothing but a case of sour grapes. One of the ANC's small parties on their side said that they agree that the ANC is doing badly, but that the IFP and DA were trying to take over Durban through the back door. And Mlondi, my question to you is, considering how chaotic that city council is it even worth the DA and IFP trying to take governance of that city over?
Yeah, Nick. Well, I say no, it's not worth it. I think they should just rather wait for 2026 because I mean it's too chaotic at the moment, and also governing through a what do you call this? It's a coalition that's not really 50% plus one, so it's called a minority coalition. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for a while. Yeah, so I mean, it's just not going to be sustainable. So I guess that the best thing that they should do is rather wait for 2026. I know it's not, like it might seem a bit far, but we're almost there, and things are a bit chaotic. So it's just going to work out. Rather just like start like in a clean manner and take it from there.
John, do you agree?
Yes, and the danger I see here is the political class sort of drifting away from the electorate. As a voter, you look at this and you're like, I just need to sort out my own life without reference to these guys and gals. And that's a problem. And I think that's happening in Johannesburg as well. There's people are really fed up with the governance, with the turmoil, the chaos, the non-delivery. There's a disconnect that's growing and becoming stronger.
I think bigger than just people getting fed up is just that the news has become so complicated and the coalitions have become complicated that a lot of people who don't really pay attention to politics, literally, it's not that they've become fed up and are no longer paying attention. It's that it's too confusing to actually follow unless you sort of delve into it. And as a result, a lot of people I talk to in Joburg who are sort of reasonably well informed are just kind of confused about who exactly is running the government right now in Joburg.
Yes,
even though the
ANC, to name them.
Yeah,
exactly.
Even though the ANC, EFF, PA, Al Jamaha coalition is it's been in power now for at least a year, but it's still sort of a lot of residents of Joburg are like, who? What? Huh? I think that also has been part of why people are getting a bit switched off by all this, is because they just can't follow it. But anyway, that is all the time we have for today. We hope you found this show interesting, and we will be back next week with the Daily Friend Show. Have a great weekend, everyone. Cheers.